Ranker, a digital media company claiming to be one of the largest databases of opinions, answered the question, "Who are the most famous orators ever?" with a long list of contenders. Number 1, Winston Churchill. Number 2, Frederick Douglass. You're likely familiar with both of these outstanding speakers. Who's number 3? Marcus Tullius Cicero. If you haven't heard of him, that's likely because he lived way back in ancient Rome. Born in 106 BCE, Cicero was a Roman statesman, orator, lawyer, and philosopher. Cicero is also well known by those who study rhetoric. In about 50 BCE, he wrote a handbook for orators, De Inventione, or On Invention, where he highlighted 5 canons of rhetoric. Oh, that's canons with one N, meaning a collection of rules or texts that are considered to be authoritative. That's according to vocabulary.com. In this case, the canons refer to principles that can help design and critique oral presentations, rhetoric, or what was considered public speaking in Cicero's time. What are the 5 canons of rhetoric? That's what this video will cover. In Cicero's language, Latin, Inventio, Dispositio, Elocutio, Memoria, and Actio. In English, they are invention, arrangement, style, memory, and delivery. 2 quick caveats. First, these canons are rooted in Western philosophy, and long ago, so there are definitely cultural differences. And second, while the canons are listed in a somewhat chronological order, there can be a lot of blending and back and forth among them. The first step to preparing a speech is inventio, or as it would be pronounced in Cicero's times, inventio. Invention, where you brainstorm what you want to talk about and your approach to the topic. In many situations, the subject is chosen for you. In others, you can select your own topic. And then once you have the topic, you have to determine your approach, like clarifying the speech purpose. Is it a persuasive speech? Informative? Entertaining? Let's choose a seemingly simple topic. Dreams. Do you want to define the topic, explain the different kinds, or focus on a particular type, like lucid dreams? Create a vision board? Persuade us to pursue our dreams? You can't cover everything, so you will have to pick and choose. How? Well, that's also part of the invention process, which should start with an audience and situational analysis. To whom are you speaking? What do they expect? What might they already know about your topic? And how might they feel about it? This initial step should help you answer other questions, like, what type of evidence would this audience be inclined to accept? Do you need something visual to help explain something? And if you do, how will you do it? Remember that you are also analyzing the situation. If the place where you are speaking doesn't have computer projection capabilities, you'll either need to bring your own or come up with an alternative. Speaking of the situation, what is the occasion? If you are offering a toast at a wedding, you'll probably include stories, humor, and emotional wording. If you are training someone, you may need to devote some time to establishing your credibility so that they are more likely to consider you knowledgeable. If it's a persuasive presentation at work, you'll probably need some hard evidence. The best speeches have a blend of all 3 of what Aristotle identified years earlier as ethos, or speaker credibility, pathos, appeal to emotions, and logos, the use of evidence and reasoning, although 1 or 2 may be emphasized, again, depending on the audience and the situation. Once you have your idea and some content for your presentation, it's time to figure out how you will organize it. This is what Cicero called dispositio, or arrangement. Any speech should be organized. It's not just a random assortment of statements. The basic organization is an introduction, body, and a conclusion. This holds true for stories as well as formal speeches. We can further break this down into the following parts. The introduction not only introduces your topic, but establishes you as a credible source, and usually creates a connection with your audience. The body of the speech needs to be developed. Providing a statement of facts offers your audience some background information so that they can better understand your speech. This could be definitions, reminders of context, statistics, and so on. Division, sometimes called partition, is essentially a preview statement or a roadmap where you give your audience a heads up on the speech's main points, something like, there are 3 aspects we'll be focusing on. Proof, or confirmation, is the main part of the speech where you make your arguments and develop your points. You'll need to organize this section too. The organizational structure will be dependent on the speech purpose, persuasive, informative, entertaining, and the topic. Common organizational structures are chronological, topical, and problem solution. The next part, refutation, essentially acknowledges that others might question your argument. This accomplishes 2 purposes: demonstrating you are fair and considering there may be alternative views or facts, which can increase your credibility, and allowing you to preempt arguments before they are brought up. Now, if you're wondering if refutation needs to be included in every type of speech, it doesn't. It's most effective in persuasive speeches. And you end with, of course, a conclusion, wrapping up the presentation and letting your audience know that you are finished. Aristotle suggested that reworking your division statement is sufficient. Now you know about the 3 most important aspects of. Consider, however, adding something more impactful after this summary or review statement. Now it's time to consider adding some style to the presentation, or what Cicero called Elocutio. Be creative and memorable with your word choice, how you relate your examples, use of visuals, and so on. Note that, in this case, we aren't talking about delivery style, but the content of your presentation. The virtues of style were developed by 2 followers of Aristotle, and Cicero and others, like Quintilian, incorporated them into their teachings. Correctness relates to using the rules of grammar properly. You may see this called purity, as it is keeping the language pure. Clarity. Even language that is used correctly may be confusing, so make sure what you are saying is clear. Evidence, which refers to the use of evidence. Does the evidence make sense or being used to reach the emotions? For example, relating a story may be more compelling than a fact. Propriety, or language that is appropriate for the topic, audience, and situation. The last virtue, ornateness, relates to using literary techniques to make your presentation more interesting. Grammarly's blog lists 20 figures of speech, including some of my favorite. Alliterations, metaphors, and puns. Oh my! Caution. You can overdo this if you're not careful. The 4th canon is Memoria, memory. If you think this means knowing your speech well enough to deliver it without notes, you are correct. In ancient Roman courts, speeches lasted for hours, not minutes, and no one used notes. Only about 15% of ancient Romans would have been able to read them anyway. So they had to come up with ways to memorize their presentations, often using a technique called the memory palace. Orators would visualize themselves walking through their home, using visual cues to jog their memory about what they needed to say. Of course, there are other ways to remember things. For example, I use an acronym, MEDIA, to remember the 5 canons. While memorization may not be as important today with our higher literacy rates and the availability of tools like teleprompters, it is still important to give the impression that you really know your subject. However, Cicero expanded the meaning of memory to include 2 other aspects, both of which I think can be blended with other canons. The first, making a speech memorable, seems to fit with the ornateness we discussed with style. And the second, what I call creating a memory file, gathering and remembering a lot of material like statistics, quotations, facts, and stories that you can use for impromptu or future speeches, seems to fit well with the Invention canon. Notice that these first 4 canons, invention, arrangement, style, and memory, relate to the content and use of words, the verbal part of communication. The final canon, Actio, or Pronutiato in Latin, is what we would call delivery. Delivery focuses on the nonverbal aspect. Think action, which many theorize is actually more important than the words. While statistics vary, a conservative estimate is that nonverbal communication accounts for about 80% of the meaning of a message. Before you start questioning me, see, I'm using the refutation part of the Dispositio canon. This doesn't mean that nonverbal can't support or emphasize the words being used. Nodding your head at the same time you say yes is consistent. However, shaking your head and saying yes in an uncertain tone of voice offers another meaning. And when the nonverbal message contradicts the verbal message, as all you masters of sarcasm are aware, audiences tend to believe the nonverbal. Delivery includes all aspects of nonverbal communication: gestures, facial expressions, posture, eye contact, pacing, tone of voice, even physical appearance. What constitutes a good delivery, however, differs based on the situation and the audience. The formal fist-pounding delivery, popular in the early 19th century, would likely be ridiculed today. In Western culture, the trend now is to use more of a conversational style so that audiences feel they can connect with the speaker. What hasn't changed, however, is that speakers need to use their delivery to establish their credibility, to appear confident, prepared, and trustworthy. Excessive disfluencies, such as nonverbal insertions like uhs and ums, choppiness, or awkward pauses, at best may give the impression that the speaker is unsure of themselves, and, at worst, interfere with the audience's willingness to listen to a speaker. Whether you speak Latin, Greek, English, or another language, you should now be able to apply Cicero's Canons of Rhetoric to all types of speeches. In fact, I'll bet that you can find examples in this video to see where I used invention, arrangement, style, memory, and delivery, even though you can't see my facial expressions or gestures. Or, better yet, use what you have learned to design your speeches to be effective and memorable.